Hey, it's Drybear, and I finally finished my latest build, Critical Mass Necromancer. This build actually inspired my last build, the Demon Bomb, that focuses on maximizing the uptime while using Bone Spirit. But this build, Critical Mass, focuses on making Bone Spirit as bat crazy as possible. What's fun about this build is there will be downtime while you're setting up for your combo where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden you one-shot things because you do so much ridiculous damage. And what's fun about this build is that it has so much extra damage in it that there's flexibility to change out the legendaries for more defense or more utility if you're looking for that. But first, you should come by my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, the next time you're set to meet with your friends, you're going to arrive first, and you'll have to sit in silence as you wait for them to arrive. So we'll start with the gameplay showcase and talk about the build, how it works, and how it functions. The primary method of damage is going to be Bone Spirit, and we put everything we possibly can into making that single hit of Bone Spirit do the most amount of damage possible, and boy does it hit hard. So an example here is many people experience fighting the Butcher in their dungeons. He appears, he attacks you, he slows, he charges, and he does a crazy amount of damage. But there's a very simple solution when you're dealing with the Butcher. Even if you're in a Nightmare 29 or higher, you see the Butcher come in, you set up all your buffs for your Critical Mass Necromancer, you pop everything, you throw out the corpse tendrils, and then all of a sudden the Butcher's dead and you don't have to worry about it anymore because it's just gonna be a one-shot. This happens all the time. This build will one-shot bosses constantly. The damage in a single hit is actually nuts. And most of the time, I actually have been starting to sacrifice more defense or more offensive options for defensive because killing bosses and killing elites is so incredibly easy with this. It makes me giggle every time that this Bone Spirit goes off and kills something. The focus of the build is to run as much crit damage, crit strike chance, vulnerable damage that you possibly can, plus every available bone passive to make Bone Spirit hit as hard as possible. Now, I'll warn you that the build I'm going to give you today is my build for pushing difficult content, Nightmare 50 and above. You will have a lot of defensive options in here, like Shielding Storm, like Protector, like having extra might or protecting. This is mainly because as you push difficult content, the damage you take becomes absolutely ridiculous. And because this build is so bursty, you don't really need as much bonus damage as other builds would. And so I've been able to work in more defense in here. So that being said, if you're looking for this build, this one is built for cutting edge content for your character and will keep you safe and alive through that. But if you're doing farming where the content is easier, you can slot in more offensive options. And towards the end of the video, I'll talk about alternative legendaries that you can use. And one thing that's cool about this build is it actually requires no uniques at all. It's very cheap to get online and very easy to play. So let's look at a sample scenario. Our focus here is going to be using corpse tendrils to proc up our crit chance and our crit damage, as well as apply vulnerable to targets. Most of the time when you're fighting, you're not really doing anything. You're just trying to set up for your combo. You're not dealing damage, and that's the reason why. You can see how even on tier 48, I'm grouping up a whole bunch of mobs, bunch of elites with massive amounts of HP. I'm not even attacking. I'm just running around, setting up, trying to get to the right spot, and then I pop my Bone Spirit and everything on screen dies. I collect my loot. I go to the next area. This is the power of the Critical Mass build. You know that if you can line up your special combo, nothing is going to survive. In fact, most of the time, if things survive a single hit, I am shocked that they're able to live through that for that main reason. Another thing that I need to make you aware of for Bone Spirit, and this is very important for running a build like this, which is Bone Spirit will always try to travel to the spot that your cursor was when you activated this. This makes this build so much more playable. If you don't know about this, it makes it feel like crap. So if you're someone that just fires Bone Spirit off in a random direction and you wait for it to arrive, it will hit the first target that arrives to it. However, where your target, where your cursor is when you activate it, it will actually pass through mobs along the way and attempt to get to that spot, which makes it far more usable. You can have it focus specific elites in the clump. You can have it go past mobs that might be blocking you or didn't make it into the corpse tendril pull. So this is very important for making this build function. Make sure your cursor is in the right spot. You can make your cursor bigger in the options menu by going options gameplay. If it helps you do so, it definitely makes a big difference. For other abilities, you have corpse tendrils for setting up your kills and applying vulnerable. You have Bone Spirit for dealing damage. You have flexibility on what else goes on, but what I recommend for this build is going to be Bone Storm. It gives you 20% crit chance while active. It also gives you damage reduction while active, which is absolutely huge. I'll also recommend Blood Mist. I'm convinced that there isn't a single Necromancer build that can push past Nightmare 60 or 70 without running Blood Mist. It is one of our only options for damage immunity and one of our only options for unstoppable. At high level Nightmare, the CC that you run into, if you get rooted by a spider or frozen or stunned, you just die. It's just too much. So having the ability to break out of CC with Blood Mist is kind of required. But again, if you're just farming with this build or just doing normal content, you can swap that out for something else if you want. Again, this is optimized and streamlined for doing content at a very high level. Next, for builder, you have two options. You could run Reap to get a corpse to spawn. I ran this in my Demon Bomb build just to get corpses to spawn. I found that it wasn't as useful for high content in this build. I like running Bone Splinters in this build for a couple reasons. One is that it actually does respectable damage. Because we're investing so much into crit damage, vulnerable, and bone damage, Bone Splinters can kill mobs. If you go up to melee range and you shotgun mobs, you can very easily kill most targets using Bone Splinters alone because it's a bone skill and it scales with it. It also will trigger your bone passives, giving you more bone scaling, and it'll trigger all the extra bonuses that you get, as well as building up energy, which is super cool. So I recommend running Bone Splinters. I've also ran every other option, Decrepify, Bone Prison, everything that I can think of, and I actually am convinced that the best for this in difficult content is going to be Iron Maiden. The thing that Iron Maiden does for us is when we put points into it, it doesn't cost essence, it builds essence. This is huge because we can target mobs, apply the Iron Maiden, and get essence back. When we pull all the mobs in with Corpse Tendril, we can hit them all with Iron Maiden, get a big jump of essence, and shoot out our Bone Spirit for damage that way. Additionally, in the tree, you can make all targets that are cursed take 9% bonus damage. This is free damage for us. And you can also modify it so that when you kill targets that are affected by Iron Maiden, you heal for 5% max HP for every target. And we're going to run max HP for this build because we have a max HP barrier in it as well. So what it means is when you, on difficult dungeons, when you're low HP, when you get your combo off, almost every single time I will heal to full HP when my combo goes off because everything dies with Iron Maiden. It heals me, it keeps me alive. It's very, very good and stable for that. You can also run a legendary on your armor pieces that makes it so that when enemies hit you while they have Iron Maiden up, they have a chance to be stunned. We do more damage to stunned targets, and it helps with the big scary melee mobs that can chase you down very easily inside difficult content. Now let's jump into the skill build. I'll have this link down below in the comments and in the description as well. This is a full build for this. And again, this is the end game cutting edge content version. You can swap these out. And at the end of the video, we'll talk about how you can modify this to make it more for easier content if you're just farming, and you can pull out some of the defense that's in here. But let's talk about the skill build and why I think it is the way that it is. Firstly, we're going to pick up Bone Splinters. Again, I like this a lot for several reasons. It actually does very good damage, but also you can stack up Compound Fracture a lot easier. The problem with Bone Spirit is it's slow and it doesn't hit very often. So things like crit 10 times with bone skills to get your bone skills to do more damage, without another bone skill besides Bone Spirit, you're going to get this every 10 times you do your combo. Very slow, very painful. You can supplement that with Bone Storm, but it's still a very long cooldown without large cooldown reduction. Compound Fracture gets much less viable if you're not running Bone Splinters as your builder. It also applies vulnerable, and again, it does respectable damage. There are many times where I'll finish a combo, there'll be a couple mobs left over that are problematic, and just using Bone Splinters is enough to slaughter them, especially if you're at point blank range and shotgun range. It actually does insane damage with this build. For our core part of the tree, we're going to pick up Maximum Essence. More Max Essence gives us more damage, but there's actually a diminishing return for Bone Spirit specifically because it'll always take your current level of Essence, and it does have caps for Ossified Essence. For all your passives and things, there will be a maximum amount that you can get. It really is just for the key passive, which scales up, but if you get the Ossified Legendary, there's a cap on how much crit damage you can get. So there's a diminishing return on this as you go higher and higher, but it does give you more bonus damage, which is nice. So we get Max Essence for damage increase there. And I still find that Hued Flesh is necessary. It is hard to generate corpses to get the combo going. but I think having this in here eases that. You can then cast Bone Splinters in between combos to farm procs of corpses that you can use to pull in, and I primarily use Blood Mist for spawning corpses as well. Again, this gives you immunity, it gives you unstoppable, because when you go into Blood Mist, it removes all CCs and you're immune to new CCs. Even if you don't have the unstoppable icon over your head, it does get rid of CCs and makes you immune to them, which is huge for endgame content. I can't stress enough how much high-end Nightmare dungeons are very reliant on avoiding CC because you will die. So we're going to pick up the modifier here so it leaves a corpse behind. You get 3 or 4 corpses from Blood Mist, and this is how I start the combo. I'll Blood Mist in, spawn a bunch of corpses, throw out the Corpse Tendril and dash away so I don't get hit by anything. When they get pulled in, throw down the Iron Maiden, throw down the Bone Spirit, everything dies. So we're going to pick that up here in this. We're going to come down to the Curse Tree, and we're going to pick up Iron Maiden. The damage on this doesn't matter. We're not using it for the damage. Primarily, we're using it for gaining essence. For each new enemy affected by Iron Maiden that hadn't been cursed before, it'll give you 5 essence. So if you pull in 15 mobs, you'll be able to get 75 essence from that by putting Iron Maiden on them. You'll also make it so that you'll heal for 5% of your max life for each enemy that dies, which means that you'll get 75% heal for that pack of 75 mobs. It is incredibly useful, especially when you have barriers going on hard content, to pop this, because you'll kill everything all at once with Bone Spirit. You'll shoot up to full HP and you'll be healthy again. Then we're going to run Amplify Damage. This gives us an option to scale our damage to targets that are cursed, and they are with Iron Maiden. We want damage reduction for close on Death's Embrace, plus some close damage, which we use part of the time. Sometimes we'll be doing distant, sometimes we'll be doing close, but we really just want the damage reduction here. So we're going to pick that up. And then extra points you can put in Death's Reach for distant damage for Bone Spirits that fly a good distance. We're going to come down here, and I've been doing this more the higher I push Nightmare, but I like maxing out Corpse Tendrils because every 10th of a second cooldown this ability has affects your ability to survive and your ability to kill. So getting this to around a 6 to 7 second cooldown on Corpse Tendril is incredibly useful. You will notice every second on cooldown for this where you have full essence and you're ready to go and you need the stun that this applies. You need to kill things because they're killing you and you're waiting for the cooldown. This hurts really bad. I like putting points into this just to raise up the cooldown. It's not for the damage, it's just for the cooldown. Applying the slow gives us bonus damage as well, and also the vulnerable is necessary for our big burst. We're also going to pick up Bone Spirit, max this out obviously, and then we're going to pick up the cooldown reset when it crits, and then we want to add crit strike chance. If you're having trouble managing essence, you can pick up Dreadful Bone Spirit, but remember, if Bone Spirit crits, it resets its cooldown. If it doesn't, it won't. So this 10% crit is actually massive for this build to function. Then we're going to grab all of the bone passives. This one gives us increasing crit chance for higher essence, which is useful for Bone Spirit. We also get bone damage every 10 times we crit with bone skills. Another reason why we run Bone Splinters in this build. We have cooldown reset every 100 essence we spend, which helps us with the Bone Storm cooldown and the Bone Spirit cooldown. And lastly, Bone Skills deal increased crit damage to vulnerable enemies. When you get bonus passives like on your amulet for these, I like getting Compound Fracture for the increased damage or Evulsion for the increased crit damage to scale that up a lot better. We're going to come down here. We're sacrificing all minions, so we're going to be grabbing these 2 passives here. Standalone gives us damage reduction, as well as Memento Mori, which scales up the sacrifice bonuses on warriors and mages, which is super good because that gives us more damage or more survivability. We're also going to pick up Bone Storm and then modify it so it gives us damage reduction and also gives us 20% crit. We want to get as close to 100% crit with this build as we possibly can. Then lastly, we're going to get Ossified Essence. This is the capstone. This puts the star on the tree. This gives us all the bonus damage. So that is the build. You've seen the gameplay. Let's go over the gearing options that we have available. Again, there aren't really any major uniques that fit this build other than what's called Shaco, or the Harlequin Crest, is the legendary helm that's from D2 that actually works for every build. It just gives you damage reduction and ranks to all skills, which works for every build agnostically. You can put it in this build if you want. If you have it, it's great. So let's talk about the damage options. You can see with this build, I have a large selection of legendaries that I swap out often while I'm testing builds, but for this build specifically, the first thing you're going to want for gearing is you need a 2-handed sword. It is non-negotiable. You cannot use anything but a 2-handed sword for this build. It needs to be a 2-handed sword. Why? because above the gray line there in the middle, the two-handed sword will always roll with bonus critical strike damage. So the weapon I'm using here has 52% critical strike damage, plus vulnerable damage, plus ultimate skill damage, which is decent, but could be way better, and I haven't even re-rolled this. This could have crit chance on it, more critical strike damage, so this build is far from optimized, but you want that extra crit strike damage to go even higher in your damage rolls, and it gets insanely good with two-handed. And then on our legendary two-handed sword, we're gonna put Grasping Veins. Remember, when you use a two-hander, it doubles the bonus of the legendary aspect, and for this one, after using Corpse Tendrils, we get up to 40% crit chance and 120% crit damage. If you didn't know, there are damage buckets in the game that affect how much damage you do. The most valuable buckets, the most valuable stat that you can get for scaling your damage above any other stat in the entire game, and it's not even close, are vulnerable damage and critical strikes. Those two are the best by far, and it helps this build tremendously. So we're gonna get the two-headed sword for crit strike. We're gonna get the vulnerable damage on this. You can reroll more critical strike damage and crit chance. And then we run Grasping Veins doubled on two-hander for incredible amounts of crit strike chance and crit damage. Your bone spirits will be absolutely insanely massive. Then what you're gonna want to run on top of that, you have plenty of options for damage. What I have on this build right here and what I'm gonna recommend to you is defensive in nature. You actually don't need much more. You can run Edge Masters for bonus damage based on primary resource. You can also run the Serration passive for crit damage when you have more essence. You can also run Swelling Curse. Bone Spirit deals damage based on distance traveled. And when you do this, you can actually, say the boss is like right here, you can pop the Corpse Tendril, dash away, and then shoot the Bone Spirit from across the room, and then run back in. And as the Bone Spirit travels, it builds up damage and does more and more. But again, I have found I don't need damage, I just need survivability. I can kill things just fine. You can also run Sacrificial with this, which is massive. I like running it on Amulet. You get a bonus to sacrifice bonuses. For our sacrifice bonuses, we can get magic resistance, which is decent. It helps with cold buildup, not freezing you. You can also run crit chance as well. We'll also get vulnerable damage from sacrificing mages, and we'll get crit damage from sacrificing golem. So raising those bonuses up makes it super nice. Having it on your amulet is really, really cool. So you have those options there. And then I've run with many different options as well that don't really matter too much for that specifically. You can also run Ossuous Gale to get longer duration on your Bone Storm. I would only run this if you're paying very close attention to your corpse management, because this will chew up 8 corpses, and then it'll make it so you can't use Corpse Tendrils, so just be aware of that, but it extends your Bone Storm build. That's kind of the primary. Then when we're looking for other options here, I love running Loop of Retribution as an option. What this does is it makes distant enemies have a chance to stun themselves, which helps with the scary mobs that do damage from distance, and you do more damage, up to 40% more damage to enemies that are stunned. We stun with Corpse Tendril, we stun with this passive as well, and all of our damage is done right after a Corpse Tendril, so we can get a pretty nice scalar of damage on this. I found good results with Retribution. You can also run the sacrifice bonuses, we talked about that. And the other thing that I'll recommend running as well is Shielding Storm on your amulet. This is massive. This makes it so every time Bone Storm damages an enemy, even if it's damaging in an area, you'll get a barrier for 8% of your max life for 10 seconds. So Bone Storm becomes a much higher damage reduction source, and especially if you're running the Ossuous Gale, which makes it last 8 seconds longer, having this on your amulet gives 8% max life every time it deals damage. You can actually walk into mob packs in difficult content and move around in position while Bone Storm is active. It helps a lot when you're setting up your combos to have this equipped. I recommend this a lot. You don't need damage, you need survivability when things get scary. For your boots, I like running Ghostwalker with this build for 2 reasons. One, it does seem to proc with Blood Mist, which means that when you get Blood Mist active, you will actually get some movement speed on it, which is super nice. And on top of that, when you run this with Eluding, which is a passive that I recommend all Necromancers run in general, when you become injured while you're crowd controlled, so if you're at 50% health, you get CC'd for some reason, and then you take damage and you get down below 35% HP, you will instantly become unstoppable for 4 seconds. It'll cleanse all CCs, and make you immune to all CCs for 4 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. This is compulsory. It's so necessary for Necromancers. They have one of the lowest accessibilities to Unstoppable of any class in the game, and if you get stunned in hard content, you die. So having this means that when you get low and you're CC'd, it breaks the CC and applies Unstoppable. And if we're running Ghostwalkers, that means that we get movement speed, and while we're unstoppable, we don't get any collision. We can run through any mobs, nothing blocks us, we can get out of trouble. These two combined into one makes difficult content a lot easier for Necromancers. We already talked about Edge Masters, super useful, super nice, gives you bonus damage. Again, you can also run Alcera's Gale in this slot if you want. And then you want defense options for the rest. You can either run Might on legs here, which gives you damage reduction every time you bone splinter, or you can run the Protecting, which gives you the immunity bubble every minute and a half. This is nice. You get 5 seconds of immunity. You can set up for your combo, stand in it, and for 5 seconds, you can get everything just right and get all the damage out, which is huge. But you can also run damage reduction. It depends on the dungeon. If there are mobs that, like you're doing like Mallwood or any of the tree ants where they have the one big one-shot swipe, you have to stand next to them in order to do things. Having the damage reduction is nice because it means you can survive the hit. But if you have dungeons that have high density with a lot of melee or ranged mobs that are constantly poking at you, sometimes it's useful to have this immunity bubble that you can stand in to set up your combo. And then you also want to pick up Protector for your helm, just to get that barrier here. This one you want to scale up as high as possible. This gives you a nice big barrier every 30 seconds when you damage an elite, which helps bridge the gap and keeps you alive. Your other option, which I've been really fond of so far, is Torturous. The Torturous aspect, what this does is that enemies that have Iron Maiden on them will constantly be stunning themselves every time they deal damage. It helps a ton, especially with the fast melee mobs that keep up with you, the big snakes, the abominations that chase you really fast. Every couple hits, they'll stun themselves and fall way behind as you're kiting. Ranged mobs will stun themselves, and remember, we do more damage to stun targets, so this all helps the build tremendously. But again, you can run your Andariel's Visage or your Shaco, your Harlequin Crest on your helm for defense there, and you can also slot in things like Higher Sacrifice bonus, your Swelling Curse for bonus damage, and your Ossified Essence. This is just what I've found to be the most successful in cutting edge content for your character, the most difficult content your character can currently do. For gems, I like running Topaz in your armor pieces most of the time. This means that when you're crowd control impaired, you get massive damage reduction. This helps a lot, again, when you get into the situations where you get CC'd and get killed. It gives you big damage reduction when you can't move your character. Super nice. And then for weapon, we want double emeralds. This gives us a big amount of damage to vulnerable targets. The other option I'll put in here as well, because we have incredible amounts of max HP scaling, is you can run rubies in your armor, which is huge because it gives you max HP, which will affect the heal that you get from Iron Maiden and will affect the shield that you get from your Bone Storm. So rubies in armor is also a great option if you're running that. And then for necklaces, for jewelry, generally I recommend running either skull or diamond. It depends on what you're running. The armor is going to be more defense overall, but sometimes if you're running cold enchanted dungeons, you need the resistance to prevent chill buildup so that mobs don't one-shot instantly freeze you and kill you. Having some resistance is going to make you take more damage overall rather than just the armor, which is more valuable of a stat. But if you get instantly frozen on one application of chill, yeah, that's a hard knock to break. So we have that. So diamonds are an option if you're going to do that there. And on the build sheet that I have for you, I actually do recommend getting rubies just for that bonus. But again, if you're running a dungeon that has high amounts of CC, you really want to consider running the topaz just for having that extra benefit there. But just keep in mind that this is kind of the base that you want for your build. For Paragon, it's actually pretty simple. We're just going to get as much damage as we possibly can, as well as much damage reduction. So we just want damage, crit damage, vulnerable damage, and damage reduction in droves because it's a simple build. It's all we really need for that. So for the starting board, we're going to come up and get all of the blue and yellows we want here. I like running Gravekeeper because it gives you damage for corpses. Anytime you're running a build that doesn't consume corpses, Gravekeeper gains a lot of value from that. And we can increase the rare nodes here, which gives us scaling damage and armor. Armor is really nice. We like that. The first board I would go up into is going to be Bone Graft. Bone Graft is super good for this build. We like it a lot. It gives us bone damage, a lot of critical strike damage, and critical strike chance, which is huge. When you're first leveling Paragon, I would always recommend coming up and getting these max essence nodes and essence on kill nodes at the very bottom of the bone graft tree. Super useful. We love that. The next one is going to be sacrificial. This one gives us bonus to magic nodes. You want to put it in an area that has good magic nodes, the blue nodes, to scale those up. Resistance is not as good, like I said, not as good for defense, but resistance helps it so when you're against like poison enchanted and cold enchanted, you don't get that build up as much. And that's what it's really useful for in general. And then you're kind of getting that defense there. Then we have bone skill damage. We have more bone skill damage pieces going on there. We want to pick up in the middle here even more critical strike damage. Crit damage is huge for us for this build in general. We like it a lot. And we're going to come up here and we are going to get the Bone Graft Legendary Node. This is another reason why I like running Bone Splinters in this build, because hitting enemies with Bone Skills increases your damage and max essence. If you only have Bone Spirit as your damage for Bone, it can be hard to stack this passive up and keep it at 8 stacks. But if you have Bone Splinters, it's very easy, plus Bone Storm, to stack that up together. Above the board, on top of this, I like picking up and adding into the build a Flesh Eater. This is super nice. We're not going to get the Legendary Node, but I like Flesh Eater because it's a good spot for the Exploit rune. So we're going to come up here. We're going to get damage, critical strike damage, which is the big thing that we need. Critical strike damage, critical strike damage, critical strike damage. Scales very well. We come up, we get Exploit, and we put as much dexterity in that area that we possibly can. And then coming down here to the right, we're going to pick up Scent of Death. Again, we're not going to get the Legendary Node because we don't care about it, but we do want the stats. Remember, we get percent life makes our barrier better and our Iron Maiden heal better, which you'll notice when you're doing difficult content. The heal from Iron Maiden is super clutch. You're going to one-shot a whole group of mobs and jump up to full health. It saves your life so much in that general usage. More critical strike damage in here, more critical strike damage in here. And then we're going to come down, and I actually found a lot of success running the control glyph. This makes it so you do more damage to crowd control targets, and you do more damage to stunned targets and slowed targets. In general, the CC bonuses all get added together and then multiplied. It's not as powerful as having the like crit strike damage, criticals in general, or vulnerable. But in this build, since all of your damage happens in one instance and it's always against targets that are stunned or slowed or both, control actually gave me a significant bonus in damage output. And I love having this in the build. It actually was a lot better than I was expecting it to be. And we want to pick up the armor here, get bonus damage as well, and damage scaling is as you need for that. That's the Paragon. You can play around the points if you want. I think this one is kind of a really good general purpose use. It has most of the damage in there, a lot of good defense. You can also run things like Territorial is good for this build as well. Territorial makes it so that when you are near a close enemy, you get damage reduction. This will give you more damage to close targets, but again, if you're running into issues where you don't have defensives, just get Territorial for the passive. 10% damage reduction against close enemies. Most of the scariest enemies in the game, aside from like corpse bows or hedgehogs, are going to be close up, so having this is very nice for defense in general. So that's the Paragon. And we kind of already talked about the other options for defense. Protecting is great. Having Iron Maiden from Torturous is actually pretty useful. Give it a shot. Serration is good for damage. Swelling Curse is very good for damage. This is where I get my biggest numbers from Swelling Curse, is if I dash across the room, launch a Bone Spirit across the room, and come back. Sacrifice bonuses is good. And then I tried with so many different options. I tried with the Scythe that gives you bonus mana against frozen targets and applies chilled. Wasn't very good. I tried Exposed Flesh here. I feel like I didn't really need the Essence Gen because I had so much downtime trying to set up my combos, especially in difficult content. I tried Torment. It's garbage. I tried so many different combos here to make this work, and I think this is actually the best overall. So that is the Critical Mass Necro build. You'll find the full build down below. I'll have the stat requirements and preferences for what stats to roll on these. You generally want cooldown reduction on Helm, cooldown reduction on Amulet, and then just crit damage, crit strike, and vulnerable everywhere that you can get it. Plus ranks on Bone Spirit, ranks on Corpse Tendril, ranks on Blood Mist for cooldown reduction, so on and so forth. So I'll have that all down in the notes section of the build sheet as well. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below. Let me know. Leave a comment. It helps the algorithm with this video to get seen by more people and helps me out directly. And then come hang out with me on live stream. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to chat with you there. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.